Tonight we travel to a river that defies all logic, a waterway so stubborn it famously flows in the opposite direction you'd expect, heading inland toward the desert before it remembers to turn back toward the sea. You stand on its bank as the last copper light of the day bleeds across the water, a wide, muddy expanse that moves with a slow, ancient patience. The air is thick, warm, and carries the mineral scent of wet earth and blooming water hyacinth. You can hear the distant, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of pestles and mortars, a sound as constant as the river's own heartbeat here. Fireflies begin to wink in the gathering dusk above the reeds, and the silhouettes of dugout canoes, known here as pirogues, glide silently toward the shore, their day's catch complete. You've joined a community of the Bozo people, often called the Masters of the River, as they begin their evening rituals. Now, you probably think surviving here is about finding food and shelter, but the real challenge is understanding a river that seems to have a mind of its own. One wrong assumption about its seasonal moods, and you won't just go hungry, you'll be thoroughly, irrevocably lost. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are welcomed not with grand ceremony, but with a simple, tired smile from an elder whose face is a map of sun lines and river crossings. He gestures for you to sit on a woven mat near a low, smoldering fire pit. The ground is hard-packed earth, swept clean. Around you, life unfolds in the soft, purposeful motions of evening. Children chase the last of the daylight, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the deep, guttural conversations of the men pulling nets from the canoes. The women, having spent the day in the fields a short distance from the floodplain, are now the nucleus of the coming meal. Your eyes are drawn to one woman in particular, her hands moving with an automatic, generations-old grace. She is pouring small, pale grains from a woven basket into a wide, shallow grinding stone. This is millet. Not the wheat or rice that might spring to your mind, but pearl millet, tiny, round, and hardy. This is the undisputed staple, the lifeblood of this region for over 4,000 years. It's a widely accepted historical fact that communities along the Middle Niger were cultivating millet and sorghum as early as 2500 BCE, building their lives on these drought-resistant grasses that could withstand the savanna's harsh whims. The grains she pours are the result of this afternoon's winnowing, tossed in wide, flat baskets to let the wind carry the chaff away, leaving behind these edible nuggets. She adds a handful of water, and the sound changes from a dry rustle to a low, grinding rumble as she begins to work a smaller, smoother stone in a circular motion over them. It's a hypnotic, repetitive labor. Scrape, crush, turn. Scrape, crush, turn. This is the foundational soundtrack of dusk here. She isn't making flour, not yet. She's dehulling the grain, breaking its tough outer shell to get to the goodness within. The crushed mixture will later be tossed in water, the lighter husks floating to the top to be skimmed off, a daily act of alchemy turning inedible seed into nourishing base. As she works, a younger girl tends to the fire, feeding it with dry stalks and a few precious pieces of charcoal. Resting in the embers at the fire's edge is a large, unglazed clay pot, blackened from countless meals. Inside, water is just beginning to shudder, anticipating its role. The evening's main dish will be a thick, sticky porridge. But first, the millet must become paste. You notice the grinder's hands are dusted with a fine, beige powder, and her forearms are strong from this daily liturgy. Historians still argue whether the specific grinding technique you're watching, the use of this saddle quern, was independently developed here or diffused from North Africa across the Sahara, a silent exchange of knowledge as significant as any trade in gold or salt. The smell now shifts. The clean scent of crushed grain is joined by something sharper, earthier. Another woman has brought a bundle of freshly picked leaves, baobab, perhaps, or bitter tomato. She begins shredding them with her fingers directly into a smaller, round-bottomed pot. This is the sauce, the vibrant counterpart to the neutral too. Into this pot will go whatever the river and the day have provided. Perhaps a few small fish, smoked over yesterday's fire and flaked apart. Maybe a handful of okra pods, their sticky juice acting as a thickener. Or simply wild sorrel, giving a tart, lemony tang. Fat is precious. A small knob of shea butter, nutty and rich, might be melted in first if the family is fortunate. If not, a spoonful of palm oil, carried from the far-off forests of the south, will add its distinctive crimson hue and smoky flavor. You listen to the river. It doesn't rush. It murmurs. It's a low, continuous presence, the source of everything you're witnessing. The fish in the coming stew came from it. The water in the pot was drawn from it. The silt it deposits during its annual flood, the crucial, life-giving flood, fertilizes the gardens where the millet grows. Your dinner is quite literally a product of the river's mood. And this river has a famously contrary mood. While most major rivers flow directly to the sea, the Niger performs a vast, lazy arc. It rises in the highlands near the Atlantic, in present-day Guinea, and then, bafflingly, heads northeast, away from the ocean, into the arid edges of the Sahara Desert, near the ancient city of Timbuktu, before finally remembering its purpose and bending southeast toward the Gulf of Guinea. This strange path meant that for centuries, European mapmakers thought it was two separate rivers. They simply couldn't conceive of one being this stubborn. So as you sit on this bank, you're at the mercy of a geographic eccentric. The man who welcomed you knows this intimately. His entire annual cycle, planting, fishing, moving the village to higher ground, is dictated by the river's slow breath, its inhale of flood and exhale of retreat. The millet paste now being stirred into the bubbling pot is a direct response to that cycle. It's a food of timing, of patience, of working with a force that cannot be controlled. The porridge thickens quickly, transforming from a watery mix to a dense, gelatinous mass. The cook attacks it with a stout wooden paddle, turning and folding it with considerable effort. This isn't gentle stirring, it's a workout. A proper to must be so thick, the saying goes, that the paddle stands upright in the center of the pot. The sauce pot now bubbles contentedly, its contents a melange of green herbs and, if the day was good, tiny silvery fish that dissolve into a savory backbone. The two pots sit side by side in the fire's glow. One, the stark, filling foundation. The other, the burst of flavor that makes the foundation worthwhile. There are no individual plates. The thick two will be scooped onto a large, communal platter, often a calabash bowl. The sauce will be ladled into a depression in the center. And then, with hands washed in a gourd of river water, everyone will gather round. You will tear off a small bit of the dense porridge, roll it between your fingers to form a neat, elastic morsel, and then dip it into the communal sauce, scooping up just enough to carry the flavor. As the last of the sun vanishes and the world is reduced to the orange sphere of firelight, the first star appears over the river's dark expanse. The chatter dies to a contented murmur. The day work is done. The first mouthful is earthy, slightly sour from the fermented grain, grounded by the millet's nuttiness, and then brightened by the sharp, green sauce. It is not a fancy meal. It is an essential one. Every element in your mouth, the grain, the leaf, the fish, the water, was provided by the few square miles of land and river around this fire. It is a complete, closed loop of survival. And as you eat, listening to the water and the soft clicks of a language tuned to this place, you understand that this simple dinner is the end point of 1,000 daily calculations made in harmony with a contrary, life-giving, endlessly surprising river. The river's murmur is your lullaby, and its pre-dawn chill is your alarm. You wake not to a rooster's crow, but to the soft, percussive splash of a cast net hitting water, its lead weights breaking the glassy surface of a wide lagoon just as the first grey light seeps into the sky. You're no longer on the main river's bank, but in a lakeside settlement nestled in the vast interior delta, a maze of channels, lakes, and floodplains where the Niger spreads its life-giving waters like a patient, deliberate hand. The air is cooler, damper, and so still you can hear the sizzle pop of fat dripping from fish roasting on a tripod of green sticks over a freshlit fire. This is the smell of morning here, wood smoke and the sweet, oily scent of fresh catch crisping over coals. You push aside the woven grass mat that served as your door for the night and step into a world painted in shades of silver and blue. Canoes are already moving, poled by silhouettes against the brightening water, heading towards stands of papyrus or submerged grasslands where fish gather to feed. Your host from last evening is there, kneeled by the fire, but her work has changed. The grinding stone is idle. Instead, she's winnowing something else, tossing it from one shallow basket to another with a soft, rustling whoosh. The grains that catch the nascent light are not the pale yellow of millet, but a minute, sandy gold, so small they look like dust. This is fonio. You crouch near the fire, soaking in its welcome heat. The roasting fish, likely tilapia or catfish, are nearly done, their skin blistered and blackened in places. Breakfast is a two-part affair, protein from the water and carbohydrate from the land. But this land-based grain is a special one. Fonio is often called the seed of the universe by cultures like the Dogon, and with good reason. It is arguably Africa's oldest cultivated cereal, a historical fact supported by archaeologists who trace its domestication back over 5,000 years. It's a puny grain, almost an afterthought compared to the robust heads of millet or sorghum, but its resilience is legendary. It grows in poor, shallow soils where other grains would fail, maturing blisteringly fast in just 6 to 8 weeks. It's the ultimate backup plan, a culinary life raft for lean seasons. And preparing it is an act of profound patience. The woman shows you the contents of her basket. The winnowing has removed the bulk of the chaff, but fonio's husk clings with a stubborn, almost spiteful tenacity. To remove it, she will use a tool you haven't seen before, a deep, wide mortar and a pestle that's taller than her arm. She pours the winnowed fonio into the mortar, a hollowed-out section of a tree trunk, and begins to pound. The sound is different from the grinding of millet. It's a deeper, resonant thud. Thud. Thud, that echoes across the still water. She is not crushing the grain, but beating it, using impact to shear the microscopic husks away from the tiny edible seeds inside. After several minutes of rhythmic pounding, she stops, pours the mixture into a fine woven basket, and begins a gentle, circular tossing motion. The lighter husks, now separated, rise to the top like ash and are expertly tipped over the edge. This process, pound, toss, separate, is repeated again, and again, and again. For a single meal's worth of fonio, it can take an hour of steady, monotonous labor. This is the hidden cost of this ancient grain. Its nutritional gift is repaid in time and effort. Historians still argue whether the incredible labor intensity of fonio processing limited its spread as a major staple or, conversely, cemented its sacred, ritual status among the peoples who mastered its secrets. As she works, the world wakes up around you. Herons take flight with slow, heavy wing beats. The lagoon's surface turns from silver to pink as the sun finally crests the distant tree line. Someone hands you one of the roasted fish, its body impaled on a clean stick. You break off flaky, steaming white flesh with your fingers, the taste incredibly simple and pure, just the essence of the fish and the faint kiss of smoke. There is no salt. Salt is a precious commodity here, traded from the far north, and is saved for special occasions or later in the day. This morning meal is about swift, efficient nourishment. Finally, The fonio is ready. The once sandy grains are now a clean, pale heap. She takes a portion and pours it into a pot of boiling water over the fire, stirring immediately with a quick, whisking motion to prevent lumps from forming. In minutes, it transforms. It swells, absorbing the water and becoming a light, fluffy, almost couscous-like porridge. It has a subtle, nutty flavor, milder than millet, and a delightful, slightly granular texture. It is served hot, piled into a small calabash. The proper way to eat it, you're shown, is to take a pinch of the fluffy grains, roll them into a small ball between your thumb and fingers, and then dip it into a condiment. This morning's dip is nothing more than a paste of pounded fresh chili peppers and a few wild herbs, thinned with a dash of water, a bracing, wake-up call for the palate. As you eat, you watch the settlement come to life. Bundles of nets are checked and repaired. Tools are gathered. The business of the day is the lagoon and its bounty. The simplicity of this breakfast, fish and fonio, belies a deep sophistication. It represents a perfect adaptation to this specific environment, the aquatic protein source and the ultra-fast, drought-evading grain. It's a meal designed for mobility and resilience. You learn a surprising detail as you finish your calabash. The leftover fonio husks, the tiny, irritating chaff that took so much work to remove, are not wasted. They are collected and used as a lightweight, effective stuffing for pillows, or sometimes mixed with clay for plaster. In a world where nothing is thrown away, even the most frustrating byproduct finds a purpose. The sun is fully up now, warming your shoulders. The canoes are far out on the water, becoming specks against the glare. The woman who prepared your breakfast is already cleaning the calabash bowls with sand and water from the lagoon, her movements efficient and unhurried. The morning meal requires no lengthy, ceremonial conclusion. It is fuel. It is done. You feel energized, the light fonio sitting comfortably in your stomach, ready for the day's heat. You step to the water's edge to wash your hands, the cool liquid a shock. Looking down, you see your reflection, blurred and rippling, superimposed over the waving green weeds of the lagoon bed. For a moment, you are part of the scene, a temporary fixture in the timeless morning rhythm of the floodplain. The main river is somewhere out there, beyond the labyrinth of channels, continuing its slow, contrary journey. But here, in its spilled, placid waters, life is immediate, focused, and fed by the smallest, most patient of grains. The lagoon's tranquil silence is shattered by the distant, rhythmic throb of drums, not the deep, ceremonial beats of village ritual, but a faster, more urgent pulse that speaks of commerce and crowds. You've traveled with a trade convoy down the main channel, the banks gradually growing more populous, dotted with villages that become towns. Now, as your canoe nudges against a packed earth landing stage, the sound swells into a cacophony that is the heartbeat of an empire. You've arrived in Gao, and it is the golden hour of the Songhai. The sun hangs low, a dusty orange ball in a haze of river mist and cooking smoke, gilding the mud brick ramparts of the palace complex and the towering, striking silhouette of the tomb of the two kings. But your senses are pulled not toward the monuments of power, but into the vortex of the city's sprawling riverside market. And your guide through this sensory storm is an aroma so rich, complex, and meaty it cuts through the smells of dung, dust, and dried fish, the scent of germa stew simmering in 100 different pots. You step from the relative stability of the boat into a river of humanity. The ground underfoot is a hard-packed paste of earth, discarded produce, and trampled straw. Porters with impossible loads on their heads bellow for passage. Merchants from the desert, their faces veiled in indigo, argue calmly with boatmen from the southern forests. A scribe, seated at a tiny wooden desk, carefully notes the contents of bulging sacks being offloaded from a caravan of weary camels. And everywhere, there are the kooks. They operate from semi-permanent stalls, woven grass roofs supported by poles, under which sit formidable clay hearths. The stew you smell is the signature dish of the Jerma people, the region's heartland cooks, and its base is a testament to imperial wealth. In a large, blackened pot, onions, a luxury here, are being fried in shea butter until they caramelize into a sweet, dark foundation. Then comes the meat. Not the occasional small fish or bush rodent of a village, but generous chunks of goat or mutton, a display of prosperity that turns a simple stew into a statement. This is a society where your dinner directly reflects your place in a vast, interconnected world. As you move deeper into the market, you pass the salt merchants. They sit like kings before crumbling, amber-colored slabs of rock salt mined from the depths of the Sahara at places like Tagaza. This isn't the fine, white powder you know. It's a rock commodity, traded by the slab, often used as a quasi-currency. A merchant breaks off a chunk with a small hammer and chisel, weighing it on a brass scale against weights shaped like miniature birds. The value is astronomical. Mansa Musa, the legendary emperor of Mali which preceded Songhai, was said to have passed through Cairo handing out so much gold it devalued the local currency for a decade. But it was the salt trade that formed the silent, gritty backbone of that wealth. Here, salt is literally worth its weight in millet, and sometimes more. You see a trader carefully shave a few precious grains from a slab into a tiny leather pouch for a woman who offers a basket of grain in return. That salt will find its way into one of those stew pots, transforming the flavor from mere sustenance to a craveable delight. But the true shock of flavor comes next. At a stall where the steam is particularly fragrant, the cook, a woman with intricate geometric tattoos on her cheeks, adds a heaping spoonful of a thick, rust-red paste to her sizzling onions. This is sumbala. It hits the hot fat and an odor explodes into the air. Pungent, funky, deeply savory, and to the uninitiated, borderline alarming. It is fermented locust beans, a traditional seasoning that acts as the umami bomb of West African cuisine, long before the word umami traveled from Japan. It's the ancient, powerful answer to soy sauce or fish sauce. Its inclusion marks a cook of knowledge and means, for good sumbala is a carefully prepared condiment, not a quick wild grab. The smell is a historical fact of life here, a signature of the region's cuisine that would have filled the air of Gao, Jen, and Timbuktu. Historians still argue whether the specific fermentation techniques used for sumbala were developed purely locally or represent a culinary idea that migrated along with the trade of goods like salt and gold, a taste traveling the desert tracks. Your own hunger, sharpened by the journey and the aromas, leads you to a slightly quieter corner of the market where a family is setting out mats for their own evening meal. They invite you with a nod. Their stew is simpler than the extravagant market versions, but it still bears the marks of Gao's privilege. In their pot, the meat is tougher cuts, simmered for hours until tender, and the sumbala is used sparingly. But the real luxury is in the grain. Tonight, it is not millet paste, but a mound of fluffy, steamed rice. Rice cultivation in the Niger floodplain is another ancient practice, but its consumption here, in the empire's later centuries, speaks of agricultural sophistication and trade. This rice might have been grown in the lush, controlled paddies of the inland delta near Jen and shipped upriver, a high-status carbohydrate. You eat as the market's frenzy begins to subside, the drumming replaced by the softer sounds of families gathering and merchants packing unsold wares. The stew is a revelation, deep, savory, complex, with the funky bass note of sumbala underpinning the sweetness of onion and the richness of meat. You use balls of rice to scoop it up. As you eat, you watch a royal procession of sorts. Servants from the palace compound are moving through the market, collecting taxes not in coin, but in kind. They take a carefully measured portion of grain from certain stalls, a piece of meat from others, a bowl of salt from the merchants. This is the empire's engine, fed directly by the commerce before you. The food in your bowl, the spices in the air, the salt on the merchant's slab, they are all threads in a vast economic tapestry that stretches from the Mediterranean's edge to the forest kingdoms, all drawn to the gravitational pull of the great river. This dinner is no longer just a meal, it's a transaction, a tax receipt, and a symbol of power, all served in a single, fragrant, unforgettable bowl. The rice and stew of Gio sit comfortably in your belly, a memory of settled, imperial grandeur. But the river of trade has a current, and it pulls you northward, away from the floodplain's verdant certainty and into a landscape where the earth itself seems to be holding its breath. 4 days, you travel with a Tuareg caravan, the rhythmic, swaying gait of your camel syncing with your heartbeat, the Niger a fading green line to the south. The world bleeds of color, transforming into an expanse of tawny sand, stark rock, and a sky so vast and uncompromisingly blue it feels like a physical dome. The air changes too. It's dry, sharp, and carries the scent of hot stone and dust. You've reached the desert's edge, the great trading post of Agadez, a city of sun-baked mud brick that rises from the plains like a mirage made solid. And as the sun dips, painting the horizon in violent streaks of orange and purple, you learn that here, dinner is not just sustenance. It's a quiet, profound declaration of survival under a limitless sky. Your caravan is welcomed into a shaded courtyard within the city's labyrinthine streets. The travel-weary camels groan as they kneel, their saddlebags, heavy with salt slabs from the north and millet from the south, are unloaded. The evening's focus is not a clay hearth, but a shallow, sand-lined pit where a fire of acacia wood, which burns with a sweet, resinous smoke, has been reduced to a bed of perfect coals. The meal will be a celebration of the desert's own sparse larder. A young man brings forward the main offering, a tough, sinewy cut of camel meat. In the savannah, meat was a rare treat. Here, the camel is life itself, transport, wealth, and, on special occasions, food. The meat is not stewed. It is salted lightly with precious grains of rock salt pounded to a powder, then laid directly on the glowing coals. The sound is a fierce, immediate sizzle, and the smell is pure, primal seared protein, a welcome shock after the complex spices of GAO. While the meat cooks, your host, a Tuareg elder whose indigo veil is stained a darker blue around his mouth and nose, prepares the indispensable companion. From a leather sack, he pours a pile of dates into a large brass bowl. These are not the plump, processed dates you might know. They are smaller, drier, with a deep, almost caramel intensity. Agadez is a crucial node on the trans-Saharan routes, and these dates likely traveled from far-off oases in the north, traded for the salt his caravan brought. He adds a chunk of clarified butter, known as smen or shihin, which has a funky, aged, cheesy richness. Then, with a pestle, he begins to mash the dates and butter together into a thick, sticky, cohesive paste. This is egajira, a calorie-dense, nutrient-packed food of travelers and warriors, designed to fuel a body across endless miles with minimal bulk. The camel meat is flipped with a stick, its exterior now charred and crackling. It's removed and placed on a woven mat to rest. The elder then brings out a sack of millet grain, not to grind, but to parch. He heats a wide, shallow iron pan over the coals and tosses a handful of millet into it. The grains dance and pop like tiny fireworks, turning a deeper brown and releasing a wonderfully nutty, toasted aroma. This is fangaso, parched grain. Once cooled, it will be ground into a powder that can be mixed with water or milk for a quick, portable gruel on the trail. But tonight, a handful of the warm, parched grains are offered as a crunchy, savory counterpoint to the sweet date paste. Historians still argue whether the technique of dry parching grains like millet was developed in the arid Sahara out of necessity, as it requires very little fuel and no pots. or if it was an ancient practice brought south by Berber peoples, another piece of desert wisdom traded along with goods. The surprising detail is in the butter. The aging process, sometimes burying it in sealed containers for months or even years, not only preserves it but develops its flavor, creating a prized, pungent ingredient that can survive the desert's extremes. It's the desert's answer to a fine cheese. The meal is served as the last light fades and the stars, undimmed by any humidity, explode across the black velvet of the sky with shocking brilliance. There are no bowls. The charred camel meat is torn into strips with the hands. You take a piece of meat, dip it into the thick, sweet savory date paste, and then perhaps roll it in a few grains of the parched millet for texture. The combination is extraordinary. The smoky, salty, chewy meat, the rich, cloying sweetness of the dates, the funky depth of the aged butter, and the crunchy, toasty grain. Each flavor is distinct, powerful, and essential. It's a meal of stark contrasts, mirroring the landscape itself, the searing heat of day and the biting cold of night, the vast emptiness and the intense, focused life of the oasis. As you eat in silence, the only sounds are the crackle of the coals and the low murmur of Tamahak language. The meal is a lesson in economy. Every element is preserved, transportable, and potent. Nothing is wasted. Even the camel's fat would have been rendered for cooking or leather treatment. The date pits will be saved, perhaps ground for animal feed or used in a simple game. This dinner is the culmination of a 1,000-mile journey, a fusion of the desert's own produce, dates, butter, with goods from the south, millet, and the north, salt. You are eating the very logic of the trans-Saharan trade on a woven mat under the Milky Way. The river, with its fish and green floodplains, feels like a dream from another life. Here, survival is a drier, sharper, more condensed equation, and the simple, powerful flavors on your tongue are the delicious solution. The desert's dry, star-pricked silence is replaced by a wall of sound so dense it feels like a physical substance. The roar of water, the shrieking chorus of a million birds, the rustle of leaves in a constant, humid wind. Your journey with the caravan has brought you full circle, but to a place transformed. You are no longer at the river's middle, but at its mighty, disorganized conclusion, the Niger Delta. Here, the great river, having finally completed its stubborn arc, surrenders itself to the ocean in 1,000 tangled channels, creating a world of mangroves, labyrinthine creeks, and fecund, swampy forests. The air is a warm, wet blanket, heavy with the scent of decaying vegetation, blooming flowers, and salt. And beneath it all, a new, distinctive aroma curls around you. The rich, earthy, unmistakable smell of red palm oil, simmering in a pot over a fire in a clearing. You've moved from the empires of the savannah to the kingdoms of the forest, where dinner is a vibrant, oily, and potent affair, often cooked not for a family, but for the court of an oba or a village chief. You are guided through a settlement built on stilts above the brackish water, the walkways made of woven palm fronds that bounce gently underfoot. Canoes are as common here as feet, tethered to every porch. The people, like the Ijaw or the Ahobo, move with a different rhythm, adapted to water and dense forest. The cooking fire ahead is larger, more public, and the cook presiding over it wears strands of coral beads, a mark of status. The meal being prepared is bunga soup, the iconic dish of the Delta, and its heart is the palm nut. You watch as a woman cracks open the hard, reddish-orange fruits with a stone, extracting the fibrous, oily nuts inside. These are boiled until soft, then pounded in a massive mortar to release their rich, red oil and thick, creamy pulp. The liquid is squeezed through a mesh of fibrous palm fronds to separate the oil and the starchy bunga broth, a process demanding immense strength and skill. This is not a quick evening task, it is an event. Into this simmering, crimson broth goes an assortment that would baffle a desert dweller. Smoked fish, Of course, from the river and the sea. Periwinkles, plucked from their spiral shells. Perhaps chunks of game from the forest. Bushmeat like antelope or grasscutter. But the true thickener and signature is a starchy paste pounded from dried cassava, known as yuzi or starch, which is added in lumps to the simmering pot, dissolving slowly to give the soup its characteristic glutinous, satisfying texture. The soup is a symphony of contrasting flavors and textures. The smoky depth of the fish, the unique, slightly sweet richness of the palm nut, the chew of the meat, and the slippery, satisfying pop of the periwinkles. It is served not with a grain paste, but with a mound of iba, cassava flour stirred into hot water to form a smooth, dough-like ball, the perfect sponge for the oily, complex soup. This meal is a display of power and community. The palm tree is the king of this ecosystem, and its oil is a historical fact of immense economic and social importance, used in cooking, for lamps, for soap, and as a trade good for centuries. Controlling the groves and the knowledge of processing was a source of wealth and influence for delta kingdoms like Benin and Warri, long before European traders arrived craving it for their own factories. The lavish use of palm oil, protein from multiple sources, and the labor-intensive preparation all signal that this is not a meal of mere subsistence, but of surplus and celebration. Historians still argue whether the particular method of extracting the palm nut broth for bunga soup originated with a specific delta culture or was a shared culinary technology that spread along the river's southern reaches as groups migrated and traded. As you wait for the soup to reach its peak, you notice something curious. Near the cook's feet is a small, covered clay pot. When she lifts the lid briefly to stir its contents, a sharp, intensely pungent smell escapes, stronger even than sumbala. This is ogairi or iru, fermented locust beans or seeds, often from the wild mango tree. It's the forest delta's parallel to the savanna's sumbala, a powerfully fermented condiment used in tiny quantities to add a deep, funky umami layer to soups and stews. Its presence here, in this royal kitchen, is a lesser-known detail that speaks to the sophistication of the region's flavor palette, a secret weapon in the pot. The cook adds just a thumbnail-sized amount to the simmering bunga, and the soup's aroma deepens instantly, gaining a base note that binds all the other elements together. When the soup is finally ready, it is a spectacular sight, a deep, glossy red, thick with ingredients, shimmering with pools of released palm oil. It is served in a large, intricately carved wooden bowl. The oba or chief eats first, using a piece of iba to scoop up the rich soup. Then, in order of status, the bowl is passed to his advisors, then to honored guests like you, and then to the wider community. The act of sharing this single, complex pot is as important as the food itself, a ritual of hierarchy and unity. The first taste is an explosion. Rich, smoky, peppery, with the unique, almost floral note of the palm nut and the lingering, fascinating funk of the ogairi. It is overwhelming, luxurious, and deeply satisfying. This is not a meal that fuels a long journey or a day of planting. It is a meal that cements social bonds, displays bounty, and celebrates the incredible, chaotic fertility of the river's final, magnificent act before it meets the sea. The royal soup's rich, oily memory lingers, a testament to the delta's abundance. But history is not just made in the pots of kings. It is made, quietly and daily, in the pots of everyday people. You leave the stilted platforms and travel back in time, not in miles but in concept, to a simpler, foundational moment along the river's earlier banks. You find yourself in a small, early settled village, perhaps from the time of the Nok culture or the nascent days of the Tikit. The air is clean, carrying only the scent of the river and the earth. The technology is basic, stone tools, woven grass, and fire. But one innovation has just arrived, and it is revolutionizing dinner in a way more profound than any spice trade: pottery. You sit by a communal hearth at the village center, watching as a newly fired clay pot, its surface still rough and unglazed, is carefully placed onto a ring of stones over the fire. This simple, humble vessel is about to change everything. Before this, cooking was direct and limited, roasting over coals, or perhaps heating stones and dropping them into water in a leather or woven basket, a precarious, inefficient method. But the clay pot is a universe of new possibilities. It allows for gentle, sustained, and contained heat. It means soups and stews, dishes where tough grains, fibrous vegetables, and scraps of meat can simmer together for hours, exchanging flavors and breaking down into tender, cohesive meals. Tonight, you are witnessing the birth of the one-pot feast. The woman tending the pot is not a specialized cook, but someone's mother, someone's aunt. She adds water from a gourd, then begins adding ingredients from a small array of baskets beside her. A handful of millet grains, still in their hulls, some chunks of yam, wild and starchy, a few pieces of smoked fish, crumbled, and a generous bunch of leafy greens, foraged that afternoon. This is not a recipe, it is an equation of availability. The pot accepts it all. As the water begins to simmer, the magic starts. The millet swells and bursts, thickening the liquid. The yam softens, releasing its starch. The fish dissolves into a savory backbone. The greens wilt, contributing their minerals and a hint of bitterness. She seasons it with nothing but a pinch of ash from a particular tree, an ancient, widespread technique that adds not just a salty flavor, but crucial minerals like potassium to the diet. This is the ancestor of all the stews you've tasted. It is the ultimate democratizing technology. Now, the very young, the old, and the toothless could be nourished by soft, digestible food. Tough, less desirable cuts of meat and fibrous plants became edible. Nutrients leached from bones and greens were retained in the broth, not lost to the fire. The widespread adoption of pottery is a firmly accepted historical fact that directly enabled population growth and settlement stability across the Niger River region, as it turned scattered ingredients into reliable, communal nutrition. You are handed a small, personal clay bowl, a luxury in itself. The stew is ladled into it. It is humble, earthy, and deeply comforting. Each spoonful, or finger scoop, is different, a bite of grain, a melt of yam, a shred of green. It is the taste of security. It is also, though no one here would call it that, the primitive progenitor of a dish that would one day conquer palates across continents: jollof rice. The concept is all here, a single pot, a medley of ingredients simmering together in a reduced, flavorful base. All that's missing is the rice, the tomatoes, and the name. Historians still fiercely argue whether the one-pot cooking tradition that both jollof originated in the Senegambia region or among the Wolof people, or if it is a much older, pan-regional style that found its most famous expression later. But sitting by this ancient fire, you are tasting the foundational idea. As you eat, you notice the potter herself, sitting a little apart, shaping a new vessel from a coil of wet clay. Her hands move with a confident, creating rhythm. She is perhaps the most important person in the village after the farmer and the fisherman, for she makes the tool that turns their raw bounty into life. A surprising, slightly amusing detail emerges as you watch her work. To temper the clay and prevent it from cracking during firing, she mixes in crushed, old pottery shards, grog, and, sometimes, the dung of grazing animals. It's early materials science, a practical solution that would make any modern engineer nod in respect. The pot she is making will be fired in an open pit, covered with brush. Its success is not guaranteed, some will crack. But the one that survives will become a family's most prized possession, passed down, repaired with sticky resin when it cracks, a ceramic member of the household. The communal pot empties slowly. Children are fed first, then the elders. The simmering has softened the world's rough edges, literally and figuratively. This simple dinner is more than food, it is a social contract. It demands cooperation. Someone fetched the water, someone gathered the greens, someone caught the fish, someone made the pot, someone tended the fire. The shared meal from the shared pot reinforces that bond. As darkness falls and the firelight reflects off the now empty blackened pot, you feel a profound sense of calm. No empires, no caravans, no royal displays. Just people, a clever pot, and a river that provided the ingredients. In this moment, the greatest culinary revolution isn't a spice or a grain. It's the humble, heat-retaining curve of baked clay, turning separate struggles into a single, sustaining, and delicious whole. The primordial stew from the communal pot was a masterpiece of local necessity, a symphony of what could be found within a day's walk. But history has a way of introducing new instruments to the orchestra. The rhythm of the village is one day pieced by a sound it hasn't heard in a season. The jingle of brass bells on a donkey's harness, and the low, weathered greetings of a man who smells of dust and distant places. The spice trader has arrived. He is a living link in a chain that stretches farther than anyone in the village has ever traveled, and his saddlebags hold not staples, but dreams. As he is welcomed to the elder's hut, the village thrums with a subdued excitement. Tonight's dinner, a simple grain porridge, is about to be transformed. You watch as the trader, after the formalities of news and gossip are exchanged, opens a small, tightly woven bag within his larger pack. He pours a few precious, withered, root-like knots into the elder's hand. This is ginger. Then, a handful of hard, brown seeds. This is meligetta pepper, often called grains of paradise. The air in the hut changes, prickling with a sharp, citrusy, warm fragrance that is utterly alien to the world of millet and river fish. The trader is not just selling, he is demonstrating. He follows the woman who will cook the evening's meal to the hearth. The pot tonight holds the usual, a millet porridge, too, beginning to thicken over the fire. The trader gestures for her to wait. He takes a single knot of ginger and a few seeds of meligetta, and with a smooth river stone, grinds them right there on a flat rock, crushing them into a coarse, aromatic powder. The scent intensifies, becoming peppery, lemony, and deeply inviting. He then does something radical. He takes a small lump of shea butter, melts it in a shallow ceramic dish over the coals, and fries the spice mix in it for just a few seconds. The aroma that erupts is transformative. It's no longer just the smell of food, but the smell of ceremony, of connection to a world beyond the horizon. This fried spice paste is then stirred into the simmering millet porridge. The effect is immediate and magical. The humble too, the daily staple, is now something extraordinary. The ginger provides a warm, tingling backbone. The meligetta adds a complex, peppery citrus note with a hint of cardamom-like sweetness. The porridge is still filling and earthy, but now it has layers, a story. It has traveled, in concept, across savannas and possibly even the desert, from the forests where these plants grow wild. The trader's visit is a historical fact of immense cultural importance. The trade routes that carried gold, salt, and slaves also carried the seeds, roots, and knowledge that revolutionized regional cuisines over centuries. Ginger, originally from Southeast Asia, likely made its way across the Indian Ocean and into the African interior via Swahili traders, a journey of thousands of miles to end up in this pot. The village eats in a state of quiet awe. The children, especially, find the new flavor fascinating, their noses wrinkling at the unfamiliar heat before they ask for more. This spiced porridge is not just a meal, it's an event, a bookmark in the year. It marks the trader's arrival, the renewal of external contact, the infusion of novelty into a cyclical life. The trader, for his part, eats heartily, knowing his demonstration is the best advertisement. He will trade small packets of these spices for bundles of cotton, blocks of shea butter, or perhaps a promise of hospitality on his next journey. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for the initial long-distance trade of such luxury items like spices was practical, as preservatives or medicine, or purely prestige-based, a way for local elites to display access to the exotic and solidify their status. In this village, tonight, it feels like both, a practical enrichment of a bland staple, and a prestigious taste of the wider world. After the meal, as the fire dies down, the trader brings out one more treasure, not for eating, but for marveling at. From a tiny, sealed gourd, he taps out a few pieces of a hard, crystalline substance the color of pale honey. He lets the elder taste a tiny fragment. It is sugar, a rare and miraculous sweetness from the far north, possibly traded all the way from the Mediterranean. It is not used in cooking here. It is a curiosity, a medicine, a token of a world so interconnected it is almost unimaginable. The surprising detail is the trader's own toolkit. Among his bags is a small, worn brass spoon with intricate geometric designs, utterly unlike the wooden spoons and calabash scoops of the village. It is his measuring tool, his eating implement, and a symbol of his profession. It might have been made in a workshop in North Africa or even Andalusia, and its presence here is a quiet testament to the cosmopolitan nature of even the most remote trade. You finish your spiced porridge, the warm tingle of ginger lingering on your tongue. The familiar millet sits in your stomach, a known comfort, but the flavor dancing above it is all adventure. You look from the faces of the villagers, lit by firelight and wonder, to the trader's weary, satisfied smile. Tonight's simple dinner has become a junction. It is where the rooted, vertical life of the river meets the horizontal, sprawling life of the roots. The river gave the grain and the water, the roots gave the story and the spark. And in this combination, you taste the beginning of a cuisine that looks both inward to its own resources and outward to an entire continent of possibilities, all simmered together in a single, transformative pot. The trader's spices leave a ghost of warmth on the palate, a memory of faraway lands. But the greatest force shaping life and dinner on the Niger is not a visitor. It is an annual, immutable event that arrives with the rumble of distant thunder and a change in the wind. The flood is coming. You feel it first in the air, a static charge of anticipation that hums through the village. The river's level, watched daily with markers carved into a sacred tree, is rising faster now, not with the gentle swell of rainy season, but with the urgent, muddy pulse of distant torrents arriving from the highlands. The community is a hive of controlled motion. Last harvests are brought in from riverside gardens, fishing weirs are adjusted, and granaries on stilts are given final checks. This is not a time of fear, but of profound gratitude and ritual obligation. Tonight's dinner will not be a private family affair. It is a feast for the river spirit, a communal offering of the first fruits of the water and the land, a meal of hope and contractual reciprocity with the force that sustains all. As evening falls, the entire village gathers at the water's edge, on a swept stretch of bank that serves as a natural amphitheater. A larger fire than usual is lit, its flames reflecting on the dark, swift-moving water. The atmosphere is solemn but joyful, threaded with the tension of ceremony. The elders preside, wearing ritual regalia of feathers and beads. The centerpiece of the meal is symbolic and immediate. The largest fish caught that very day, a mighty capitin or Nile perch, is presented whole on a bier of fresh green leaves. It will be roasted over the main fire, but not before prayers are chanted over it, thanks given for its life, and pleas made for its brethren to return in abundance with the rising waters. Alongside it, the first grains of the season's early harvest millet, parched and pounded into a fine flour, are being mixed with water into a sweet, uncooked paste. This is fura, a ritual food often associated with new beginnings. The cooking itself is part of the ritual. Young men turn the massive fish on its spit, while women prepare the accompanying dishes in pots that have been ritually cleaned. The usual vegetables are absent. Instead, they use the tender, first leaves of the baobab and the tart fruits of the tamarind, both at their peak, their flavors symbolizing the renewal the flood brings. There is a historical fact embedded in this festival. The societies of the Middle Niger, like the legendary Wagadu Empire of the Ghana, were not just shaped by the river, but by their conscious, ritual management of its floodplain. They developed a sophisticated understanding of hydrology, building their settlements on tells, mounds of accumulated habitation debris, to stay above the water, and timing their agricultural cycle to the flood's retreat, planting in the moist, fertile silt. This feast is the spiritual engine of that entire system. As the fish cooks, its oily smoke rising as an offering to the sky, the elder begins the story. It is the story of the river spirit, a capricious entity that must be honored. He speaks of years when the spirit was angered, and the flood was weak, bringing hunger. He speaks of years of perfect alignment, of bounty. The meal is a covenant. We give you the first and finest of what you have given us, the prayers imply, so that you will continue to give. Historians still argue whether these animist flood rituals, which are widespread along the river, were later overlaid with Islamic or Christian practices as religions spread, or whether the core concept, the reciprocal gift to nature, proved so powerful it was absorbed into the new faiths in a syncretic blend. The surprising detail of the evening is in the drink. Large calabashes are filled not with water, but with a lightly fermented, sour-sweet beverage made from the fruit of the nebo or gingerbread plum. It's only mildly alcoholic, but its effervescence and specialness mark the occasion as truly set apart from daily life. It is the river's bounty, transformed by time and human ingenuity, returned as a libation. When the food is ready, it is served in a specific order. The elders receive the first, choice portions of the fish. Then, the hunters and fishermen who provided are honored. Then, the children, representing the future the flood must nurture. Finally, everyone else. You eat the flaky, smoky flesh of the sacred fish, dipped in the tart baobab leaf sauce. You taste the sweet, gritty freshness of the fura paste. Each flavor is vivid, uncomplicated, and deeply of this moment. This is not a meal of sophistication or spice, it is a meal of essence. You are tasting the river itself, the sun on the first grains, the very concept of renewal. As the feast concludes, offerings are made. Pieces of the fish, balls of the fura, and splashes of the fermented drink are cast into the flowing water, disappearing instantly into the dark. It is a direct transaction. The village has fed the spirit, and now trusts the spirit will feed the village. The mood shifts gradually from solemnity to a gentle, exhausted celebration. Soft drumming begins, and people talk of the work to come, the planting, the new fishing grounds the flood will create. The simple dinner, shared by all, has performed its crucial function. It has aligned the community with the cycle of nature, expressed gratitude in the most tangible way possible, and fortified them, body and soul, for the season of abundance and labor that the river's rise promises. The full belly you have is not just from food, but from the deep, ancient comfort of participating in a cycle that has repeated, with variations, for 1,000 years along these life-giving, unpredictable banks. The communal fervor of the flood feast settles into a profound, post-ritual quiet. The river continues its work, swelling its banks, but your own path now leads away from the village and into a city of a different kind of hunger. The drums of celebration are replaced by the murmur of study, the scratch of reed pens on paper, and the soft, earnest debates of men hunched over manuscripts in the muted light of oil lamps. You have come to Timbuktu at its intellectual peak, a city where the desert's dry air preserves not just bodies, but knowledge. Here, amidst the sand-colored libraries and mosque schools, Dinner is a frugal, functional affair. You are invited to share the evening meal with a Qadi, a learned judge and scholar, in the courtyard of his modest home. The aroma greeting you is not of rich spices or roasting meat, but of something simpler, earthier, beans simmering with onions and a whisper of cumin. The scholar's world is one of abstraction and text, but his meal is one of grounding practicality. He explains as his servant, or more likely, an advanced student performing a duty, brings the food. The body is a vessel for the mind, he says, his voice calm and measured. One must fill it with fuel that burns cleanly and long, not with heavy vapors that cloud thought. The dish before you is a thick stew of black-eyed peas or cowpeas, cooked until they begin to break down into a creamy consistency. It is enriched with a little onion fried in a minimal amount of oil, and seasoned with a pinch of salt and that single, warming spice, cumin, known for its digestive properties. It is served with flatbreads of millet, baked on a convex griddle called a tour. This is not a meal to excite the senses, but to sustain the intellect. It is the dietary equivalent of a clear, concise argument. This reflects a widely accepted historical fact. The scholarly centers of the Mali and Songhai empires, like Timbuktu, Jen, and Gao, were nodes in a vast network of Islamic learning. Scholars, judges, and students often lived on modest endowments or stipends, their lives dedicated to study, copying, and debate. Their cuisine, while influenced by the trans-Saharan trade, was necessarily restrained, prioritizing ingredients that were cheap, filling, and non-disruptive. The humble bean stew was a staple of such circles, providing steady, slow-release energy for long hours of concentration. The surprising detail is in the drink served alongside, not water, but a lightly sweetened infusion of mint or hibiscus, sipped warm. The scholar explains that good water can be scarce in the city, and boiling it for tea ensures its safety, a practical hygiene measure dressed in the habit of refreshment. As you eat, dipping the dense, nutty flatbread into the creamy beans, your host speaks of his work. He is collating different commentaries on a point of Maliki jurisprudence. The food requires no attention, it is bland enough to be ignored, which seems to be the point. His mind is on the nuances of inheritance law, not on the flavors in his bowl. This is a dinner where the conversation is the main course. He tells you of astronomical charts copied from Arabic texts, of medical treatises that debate the humoral properties of the very foods you are eating. Historians still argue whether the intellectual flourishing of cities like Timbuktu was primarily fueled by the wealth of the gold and salt trade, which funded libraries and attracted scholars, or whether it was driven more by a deep, indigenous thirst for knowledge that found a perfect conduit in the literacy and global connectivity Islam provided. Sitting with this man, it feels like the latter. The trade funded the parchment, but the quiet, persistent hunger for understanding was already here. The meal concludes with a few dates, a direct source of quick sugar for the brain, and a final cup of the herbal infusion. There is no lingering over the empty bowls. The scholar's mind is already returning to the page waiting for him inside, illuminated by a small, efficient lamp burning nut oil. His dinner had no theatricality, no display of status or wealth. Its value was purely utilitarian, yet in that utility, it possessed a kind of austere elegance. It was designed to support a life of the mind, to keep the vessel functioning so the precious cargo of knowledge within could be preserved, compared, and expanded. As you take your leave, stepping back into the cool night air of the city, the smell of beans and cumin lingers, a humble perfume for a palace of ideas. You realize that in this place, the simplest dinner was an intellectual tool, and a pot of beans could be the quiet fuel for a civilization's memory. The scholar's quiet beans sit in your stomach, a meal of pure purpose. But the human body, and the society that depends on it, craves more than just fuel for thought. It craves the visceral, the celebratory, the taste of direct success. As you leave the city's dusty lanes behind and return to the rhythm of a riverside village, you feel a new tension in the twilight air. It's a watchful silence, punctuated by the calls of nocturnal insects and the crackle of the main hearth. The children are unusually still, their eyes not on their games but on the path leading from the dense thicket beyond the fields. They are waiting for the hunter. And as the last scarlet band of light fades from the horizon, he emerges, a silhouette against the darkening brush, moving with the tired, purposeful gait of a man carrying weight. Over his shoulder hangs the slim, graceful form of a small antelope, a duiker. A murmur, not a cheer, ripples through the waiting group. Tonight, the hunter has returned, and his success means the evening's okra soup will have a rare, smoky depth. The animal is treated with a respect bordering on ceremony. It is laid on a fresh bed of leaves away from the main living area. The hunter himself, after drinking deeply from a gourd of water, begins the careful process of skinning and butchering, his movements precise and economical. Every part will be used. The hide will be scraped and tanned for leather, the sinew saved for cord, the bones for tools or fertilizer. The meat for the pot is the lean muscle from the haunches and back. He cuts it into small, neat cubes. This is not a daily occurrence. In a village reliant on fish, legumes, and grains, red meat from the bush is a celebrated luxury, a gift of protein and fat from the world beyond the cultivated fields. The hunter's status, often romanticized, is in reality one of tense skill and patient failure. His success lifts the entire community's spirits and nutrition, if only for a meal. In the main cooking area, the base of the soup has already been prepared. A woman has been slicing okra pods into thin discs, their sticky mucilage ready to act as a natural thickener. In a pot, she has fried onions and perhaps a tomato or two in a base of palm oil. Now, she receives the precious cubes of meat. They are not simply added raw. First, the hunter skewers a few choice pieces on a green stick and holds them directly over the coals of the fire, searing them quickly. This isn't to cook them through, but to impart a foundational layer of smoky, caramelized flavor, a technique as old as fire itself. These charred morsels are then added to the pot with the rest of the raw meat, where everything will simmer slowly. The okra goes in last, cooking just long enough to soften and release its thickening agent without becoming slimy. The smell that now wafts from the pot is profoundly different from the scholar's beans or the trader's spiced porridge. It is deep, savory, meaty, with the bright, green note of the okra and the underlying richness of the palm oil. It is the smell of fortune. It is a widely accepted historical fact that hunting provided a crucial and consistent supplement to the agricultural diet along the Niger, with different game, from giant eland and buffalo to rabbits and large rodents like the grasscutter, playing a role depending on the region and era. The hunter's knowledge of animal behavior, migration, and butchery was a specialized, vital form of environmental literacy. As the soup simmers, the hunter washes himself at the river's edge, the day's tension leaching away. He will eat the best portion, his right earned by risk and skill. Historians still argue whether the role of the hunter in these settled, agricultural societies was primarily a practical provisioner or if it retained a more ritualistic, symbolic status, a living connection to a wild, untamed world that the farmers and fishermen had otherwise domesticated. The surprising, slightly amusing detail comes from the hunter's kit, which he now cleans beside the fire. Among his iron-tipped arrows is a small gourd stoppered with a plug of wax. Inside is a paste made from crushed chili peppers and the venom of a certain species of millipede, used to coat arrowheads for larger game. It's a primitive but effective toxin, a piece of pharmacological knowledge passed down through generations of hunters, a far cry from the scholarly medical texts of Timbuktu but no less sophisticated in its context. When the soup is served, poured over mounds of stiff millet paste, the meat is tender, the the okra silky, the broth rich and slightly glutinous. The smoky note from the initial searing permeates every spoonful. The meal is eaten with a contented focus. There is laughter now, and the hunter recounts, in spare detail, the story of the chase, the weight, the wind direction, the single, clean shot. His story is as much a part of the meal as the meat itself. This dinner is a narrative of skill and luck, a break from the predictable cycles of field and river. It is a reminder that the land, even when tamed for millet, still holds wild gifts that require courage and respect to retrieve. As you savor the complex, hearty soup, you understand that this is more than protein. It is a taste of the wilderness itself, carefully, gratefully brought into the circle of the firelight, transforming an ordinary evening into a quiet, smoky feast. The hunter's smoky soup is a gift of the untamed bush, a taste of serendipity. But most dinners along the river are not born of chance. They are born of sweat, foresight, and a stubborn partnership with the soil. As the first faint blush of dawn stains the sky not over water, but over a vast, flat expanse of cultivated land, you find yourself not with fishermen or cooks, but with a farmer. He stands at the edge of his field, a dark silhouette against the lightening gray, his hand testing the wind. The air is still and heavy, carrying the dense, green scent of growing millet and the faint, metallic hint of impending rain. 4 days, the sky has been building this promise. Now, great bruised clouds tower in the east. This is the moment. The last, hard labor before the rains break and the planting begins in earnest. His body aches from days of clearing and preparing the soil. And his dinner, eaten alone at the boundary of his domain, is not a communal feast or a family supper, but a warrior's fortification, a simple, powerful meal known as dambu. He walks back to his small, temporary shelter at the field's edge, little more than a raised platform with a thatched roof to store tools and offer shade. From a leather bag, he takes out the components of his meal. There is no fire to light now. That would come later, if the rain held off. This is a cold, efficient lunch that is also dinner, consumed before the sky opens. He takes a handful of cooked and dried millet balls, hard as stone, from one pouch. From another, he takes a smaller pouch of powder, baobab leaf powder, rich in vitamins and minerals. He mixes the two in a wooden bowl, adding water from his gourd and stirring vigorously with his fingers. The millet balls, designed for preservation and portability, slowly soften and disintegrate, thickening the water into a grainy, cold porridge. The baobab powder turns it a faint green and gives it a tangy, lemony flavor. This is dambu in its most basic form, traveler's food, farmer's fuel. But today, because the work is so critical and the rain so imminent, he has a special edition. He reaches for a third, small bundle wrapped in leaves. Inside are the fresh, tender leaves and seed pods of the moringa tree, foraged that very morning from a tree near his compound. He shreds them directly into the porridge. Moringa, now hailed globally as a superfood, has been a secret weapon of West African nutrition for millennia. It is a historical fact that drought-resistant trees like the baobab and the moringa were, and are, integral to food security in the Sahel, providing critical nutrients during the hungry season before the main harvest. The farmer isn't following a trend, he is enacting an ancient survival strategy. The moringa leaves add a peppery, fresh bite and a massive boost of vitamins to the otherwise bland, starchy mix. He eats quickly, scooping the cold, tangy, gritty paste with his fingers, his eyes never leaving the horizon where the clouds are mounting. This meal is an act of hope and endurance. Every calorie in it is geared toward converting into the energy he will need for the frantic hours of sowing that will follow the rain's first drops. The millet provides the carbohydrates, the baobab and moringa provide the micronutrients to stave off fatigue and illness. There is no pleasure in this eating, there is necessity. Historians still argue whether the agricultural practices of the Niger floodplain, with their intricate timing of recession agriculture, were developed independently by the region's inhabitants or were influenced by techniques from the Nile Valley, carried along the Sahelian corridor by migration and trade. Watching this farmer, it feels deeply indigenous, a hard-won dialogue between human rhythm and climatic pattern. As he finishes the last of the dambu, a first, fat drop of rain lands with a definitive plink on the dry soil at his feet. Then another. He doesn't move to shelter. He stands, puts his bowl aside, and picks up his sewing basket, filled with this year's selected millet seed. The surprising detail is in that seed selection. He didn't just use any grain. Before bagging it, he and his wife would have carefully winnowed and selected the largest, healthiest seeds from last year's harvest, sometimes even using a primitive method of floating them in water to discard the less dense, less viable ones. This unsung act of selective breeding over countless generations is what created the hardy, productive strains of millet and sorghum that fed empires. His dinner of cold porridge is the prelude to ensuring next year's harvest, and the next generation's dinner. The rain begins in earnest, a warm, steady downpour that smells of ozone and wet earth. The farmer walks into it, becoming a blurred figure moving down the prepared rows, his arms swinging in a rhythmic arc, scattering the future into the mud. His simple dinner is already at work inside him, converting to strength, to motion, to life. Back in the village, others will be eating warmer, more social meals. But here, on the frontier between the settled compound and the wild field, this solitary, cold, profoundly nutritious bowl is the most important dinner of the year. It is the catalyst. It turns a man with a bag of seed into an agent of the season, a partner in the ancient, unglamorous, and utterly essential act of making the river's gift of silt bear fruit. The farmer's solitary, purposeful meal is swallowed by the rain, which falls in a steady, soaking curtain that promises life. As the downpour finally eases into a dripping stillness, night falls completely, a profound, velvet blackness only the wet season can bring. In the village, the downpour has driven everyone indoors or under deep eaves. But now, as the clouds tear apart to reveal a scatter of stars, people emerge. They are drawn not just by the cooler air, but by a sound, a voice, rising and falling in a melodic rhythm, punctuated by the soft clack-clack of a calabash rattle. The griot has taken his place by the central, rekindled fire. The day's work of waiting, planting, or hunting is over. Now comes the work of memory, of social glue, of collective identity. And as the community settles on mats and stools in a wide circle, a large, common bowl is placed in their midst. Tonight's dinner is not about individual plates or even family pots. It is about the shared bowl, and every dip into it is a reaffirmation of belonging. The bowl, a wide, shallow calabash, holds a mound of smooth, white paste. This could be pounded yam, made from yam flour stirred violently in hot water until it becomes a stretchy, dough-like mass, or it could be a very fine, smooth version of millet too. Beside it rests a deeper pot filled with a rich, dark sauce, perhaps made with agusi, melon seeds, ground into a thick, nutty paste, or with leafy greens and smoked fish. The griot begins his tale, perhaps an episode from the Sundiata epic, the story of the founding of the Mali Empire. His voice is an instrument, dropping to a whisper for intrigue, soaring for battle, rumbling for the words of a king. As he speaks, the elder man seated closest to the bowl reaches in. He takes a substantial handful of the paste, rolls it deftly between his palm and fingers into a neat, egg-sized ball, and then dips it deeply into the central sauce, coating one side. He eats it, and then the bowl is passed to his right. This is the rule. You take only what you can hold in one hand. You dip only once, being mindful to not take more than your share of the precious sauce. You eat the morsel, and then you pass the bowl along. It moves in a slow, ritual circle, following the path of the sun, from elder to adult, to mother, to young adult, and finally to the children at the outer edges. The griot's story is the soundtrack, but the meal is the ritual. Your turn comes. The paste is warm, soft, and heavy. You roll your portion, dip it into the complex, savory sauce, and place it in your mouth. The act feels different from eating from your own dish. It is participatory, communal, and governed by unspoken etiquette. This practice of eating from a shared bowl is a widely accepted historical fact as a core social mechanism across many West African societies, reinforcing hierarchy, reciprocity, and unity. It literally makes a community from a common source. As the bowl continues its circuit, the story unfolds, a tale of betrayal, exile, and triumphant return. The griot's details are vivid. The sound of the Soso king Simunguru's magical balafon, the scent of the rain-soaked savanna where the exiled Sundiata hides. The food becomes part of the narrative rhythm. During tense moments, the bowl might pause in someone's hands, uneaten. During triumphant passages, it moves faster. The surprising detail is in the sauce itself. To ensure hygiene and flavor for all, the cook will often float a whole, raw onion or a whole, fresh chili pepper on the surface of the sauce. As each person dips, they gently push the onion or pepper aside. This isn't just an obstacle, it's a subtle, floating monitor. If someone is too greedy or dips too clumsily and submerges the floating object, they are gently, humorously chastised. It's a clever, low-tech solution to communal dining etiquette. Historians still argue whether the griot tradition, with its deep preservation of oral history, was a uniquely Mande invention that spread with the Mali Empire, or if it was a social role that emerged independently in various complex societies across the region as a way to consolidate royal power and group identity. Listening tonight, the power feels primal, older than any single empire. The griot isn't just telling a story, he is performing the DNA of the people around the fire. And the shared meal is the physical expression of that shared ancestry. Every shared dip is a covenant. We are from the same paste, we savor the same sauce, we are bound by the same story. The bowl completes its circle, returning to the elder near the griot. It is empty. The sauce pot holds only traces. The story reaches its climax, Sundiata's victory at Kirina, and ends with a final, resonant chord from the rattle. For a moment, there is silence, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the satisfied fullness in everyone's stomach. No one is hungry, but more importantly, no one has eaten alone. The simple, sticky paste and the rich sauce have done more than nourish bodies. They have reknit the social fabric. The child who ate last received the same food as the elder who ate first. In the darkness, with the griot's words still echoing in your mind and the taste of the shared sauce on your lips, you feel an invisible web connecting everyone present. This dinner was not a meal served, but a community consumed, one careful, respectful, delicious handful at a time. The shared bowl, passed under the spell of the griot's voice, embodies a community of equals bound by story and sustenance. But power along the Niger was not always so circular. Often, it was a pyramid, and its apex demanded a different kind of dinner. The following evening, you find yourself not in a village circle, but on the periphery of a royal compound in a city like Benin or one of the Hausa kingdoms. The air here smells different, less of earth and river, more of incense, exotic woods, and the concentrated scent of many, many people working. You are not invited to the feast itself. You are shown, discreetly, the engine that makes it possible. You stand at the edge of a vast, open courtyard that serves as the royal kitchen, and the scale of it takes your breath away. This is not a hearth. It is a culinary factory operating under the open sky, and its product is not just food, but the theater of power. Dozens of people move in a controlled chaos. Teams of women, sitting in rows, grind mountains of spices with the relentless rhythm of an assembly line. Young boys turn whole sheep and antelope on massive spits over trench fires longer than canoes. Steam rises in great clouds from gigantic, blackened pots where entire sacks of rice or mounds of yam are boiling. The noise is immense. The slam of pestles, the sizzle of fat, the shouted orders of the head cook, a formidable figure who moves between stations with a critical eye, tasting from a long spoon. This is the hidden labor behind the lavish multi-dish feast happening just beyond the wall, in the opulent reception hall where the king, or Oba, entertains ambassadors, generals, and wealthy merchants. The meal you witnessed in the Delta was a display of community bounty. This is a display of state power. A single dinner service here requires logistics akin to a military campaign. It is a widely accepted historical fact that the grandeur of a West African royal court was measured in part by its hospitality, and the ability to feed hundreds, even thousands, of guests at a moment's notice was a direct projection of economic and organizational strength. The ingredients tell a story of far-reaching influence: rice from the floodplains, spices from the forests and across the Sahara, lamb from northern herds, ray fish from the distant coast, cola nuts from the deep south. Everything is prepared in staggering multiples. You watch as a cook prepares the base for what will be hundreds of servings of a rich stew, using not a spoon, but a wooden paddle the size of an oar to stir a pot as tall as a child. Amidst this orchestrated frenzy, you notice a moment of startling precision. A senior cook is preparing the Oba's personal dish, separate from the vast batches. She uses a small, perfectly clean bronze pot. The ingredients are the same in kind: the best cuts of meat, the finest rice, the most aromatic spices, but in their selection and preparation, there is a fastidious, almost medical care. A taster, a trusted elder, samples a tiny portion from a separate dish before it is allowed to proceed. This is the paradox of royal power. It is expressed through overwhelming generosity, yet protected by profound suspicion. Historians still argue whether these lavish royal feasts were primarily a tool of political control, used to reward loyalty and/or rivals, or if they served a deeper economic function as a form of redistribution, where the king's wealth was literally consumed by the populace, circulating food and resources through the body politic. In this kitchen, it looks like both, control and circulation on a monumental scale. The surprising detail is in the cleanup. You see a group of young women not washing dishes, but carefully collecting the ash from the cooking fires. This prized, fine ash, particularly from certain woods, will be sifted and stored. It is not waste. It will be used as a key ingredient in making soap, or as a mordant in dyeing the luxurious textiles worn at court, or even as a polishing agent for ritual brassware. Nothing, not even the residue of the feast's creation, is wasted. It is all absorbed back into the economy of the palace. The head cook walks by, and you catch a phrase she barks at a porter bringing another sack of grain: "The king's generosity is his strength." It's not a sentimental saying, it's an operational principle. The tons of food being prepared are a calculated expenditure, a show of wealth so abundant it can be eaten. As the last massive platters, piled high with golden rice, glistening stews, whole roasted beasts, are carried by procession into the royal hall, the kitchen falls into a sudden, exhausted quiet. The workers now eat their own dinner, a simple, hearty porridge made from the same grains, with a plain sauce from the less choice cuts of meat. They eat quickly, sitting on the ground where they worked. Their meal is the shadow of the feast, its necessary foundation. You taste this simple porridge. It is good, filling, but it lacks the intricate layers of the royal dishes. It is fuel for labor, not a symbol of power. Sitting in the now darkening courtyard, surrounded by the cooling, giant pots, you understand the full picture. The royal dinner was an illusion of effortless abundance, a spectacle of flavor and excess. But here, in the lingering smells of sweat, smoke, and spent effort, you witnessed the truth. That every bite of that majestic feast was built on the disciplined, coordinated labor of countless unseen hands, a hidden kingdom of fire and food that made the visible kingdom possible. The ghost of royal spices hangs in the memory, a testament to power's grand appetite. But the river and the sky do not always cooperate with the plans of kings or farmers. You have witnessed the feast of the flood, but now you witness its inverse. A season when the rains are shy, when the river's rise is a hesitant shrug, not a generous deluge. The air in the village is no longer charged with anticipation, but with a thin, watchful anxiety. The granaries, still holding the memory of last year's bounty, are being gauged with frugal eyes. The green flush of the landscape is subdued, dustier. This is the creeping edge of scarcity, not yet famine, but its sobering prelude. And in this season, dinner changes its character completely. It is no longer about flavor or community ritual. It becomes an act of resilience, a quiet dinner drawn not from the cultivated field, but from the ancient, unforgiving textbook of survival knowledge. You sit with an elder woman, not by the main hearth, but by a smaller, more private fire behind her hut. The pot on it holds water, and she is adding ingredients that would never grace a festival bowl. Her hands move with a slow, deliberate knowledge, sorting through a basket of foraged leaves, tough, bitter wild amaranth, the prickly leaves of the kenaf plant, the dried pods of the acacia tree. These are famine foods, plants that survive when millet withers. They are bitter, fibrous, and often require complex preparation to become merely edible, let alone palatable. She boils the leaves in multiple changes of water to leach out their worst toxins and bitterness, a process that also sacrifices precious nutrients, but makes survival possible. This is a widely accepted historical fact of life in the Sahel. Communities maintained a deep, classified knowledge of hunger foods, a botanical safety net passed down through generations, especially by women. Knowing which wild tuber could be pounded into flour, which bark could be boiled into a thin gruel, was as valuable as knowing how to plant a seed. Into this pot of boiled greens, she adds the only grain she can spare, not millet, but the tiny, indomitable fonio, or perhaps a handful of drought-resistant African rice. The grains are not plentiful. They are a scant sprinkle, a token to give the bitter broth some body and a whisper of energy. The resulting soup is a thin, green-gray gruel, a world away from the rich stews of normal times. It is seasoned with nothing but a pinch of ash for minerals. There is no meat, no fish, no oil. This meal is not about satisfaction. It is about staving off the hollow feeling that precedes weakness. As she stirs, she hums an old tune, not a griot's epic, but a simple, repetitive melody about endurance. Historians still argue whether the cyclical famines that punctuated the region's history were primarily driven by climatic shifts like droughts, or were exacerbated by the very concentration of population and resource demands that the successful empires created. In this quiet courtyard, the cause matters less than the response. The surprising detail comes from a small gourd hanging from her hut's roof. She takes it down and taps a small amount of a fine, grayish powder into the palm of her hand. It is not a spice. It is powdered, baked clay, known as kawu or calabash chalk. In times of extreme hunger, when the stomach cramps with emptiness, small amounts of this clay are eaten. It has no nutritional value, but it provides a feeling of fullness and can soothe the acidic pangs of hunger. It is a last resort, a psychological and physical buffer against despair. Its careful use is a stark measure of the distance between a lean season and a true crisis. She does not add it to the pot tonight. Its presence is a precaution, a silent witness on the shelf. She serves the thin gruel in 2 small calabash bowls. You taste it. It is profoundly bitter, with an earthy, almost medicinal aftertaste. The few grains of fonio provide a fleeting moment of texture. It is a difficult meal to eat, a chore for the body. Yet, as you finish it, you feel a dull warmth spread through you. The hunger that was beginning to coil in your belly is quieted. This is not a dinner to enjoy, it is a dinner to respect. It represents the other side of the river's gift, the times when the gift is withheld, and human ingenuity must scrape sustenance from the margins. The woman's face is calm, etched with the patience of one who has seen many cycles. She knows this knowledge, this ability to transform bitterness into survival, is her people's true wealth. The royal feast was a display of surplus. This meal is a monument to memory, a direct link to every ancestor who ever looked at a barren landscape and remembered which thorny plant could keep a child alive for one more day. As night falls, the village is quieter than usual. There is no storytelling, no shared bowl. Families eat privately, conserving energy and hope. The simple, bitter dinner has done its job. It has turned wanting to waiting. It is a meal that asks for nothing but patience, and offers, in return, the slim, tough thread of continuity. The memory of the bitter gruel is a taste that lingers, a solemn reminder of the river's fickle nature. But resilience is not just about enduring lack. It is about continuity, about the quiet persistence of patterns. Your long journey along the ancient Niger, through empires and villages, feasts and famines, now finds its final, gentle eddy not in the past, but in a seamless, almost invisible transition to the present. You are no longer sitting on a woven mat under the stars. The surface under you is cool tile. The light above is electric, but soft. The air carries the familiar, comforting hum of a refrigerator. You are in a modern kitchen in a city that now straddles the ancient river, perhaps Bamako, Niamey, or Lagos. And you are watching someone prepare dinner. The tools have changed. A stainless steel pot replaces the blackened clay one. A gas flame hums steadily instead of the crackle of wood. But the actions, the ingredients, the very concept of the meal, are echoes so strong they feel like vibrations from a deep, persistent drum. The cook, let's say she's a young professional, is making soup. She takes a bottle of red palm oil from the cupboard and pours a generous glug into the pot. The rich, earthy aroma that rises is identical to the one that filled the delta air. She chops onions, their sizzle a universal prelude. From her freezer, she adds a bag of pre-cleaned, chopped spinach, a modern convenience. But she also reaches for a small plastic container of a dark, pungent paste, ayaru, fermented locust beans, the direct descendant of the sumbala and ogairi that seasoned pots 1,000 years ago. She stirs it in, and that ancient, funky umami depth blooms in the modern kitchen, connecting her in an unbroken line to the traders and royal cooks of Gao and Benin. Then come the proteins, perhaps some chicken thighs, a modern affordability, but maybe also dried fish, bought from a market vendor whose ancestors were bozo masters of the river. She adds stock from a carton, but the principle is the same, a flavorful liquid to unite the elements. As the soup simmers, she prepares the accompaniment. She might reach for a bag of semolina to make a quick iba, or perhaps a box of pre-pounded yam flour. She boils water, pours in the flour, and begins to stir vigorously with a modern wooden spoon. The motion, the transformation of powder into a smooth, stretchy dough, is exactly the same as that performed by the woman at the communal hearth with her giant paddle, only the scale is different. This is a widely accepted, yet often overlooked, historical truth, that the core culinary techniques and flavor pillars of West African cuisine, the one-pot stew, the pounded starch, the use of fermented condiments and palm oil, represent one of the world's most enduring and resilient foodways, surviving empires, colonization, and globalization not as museum pieces, but as living, adaptable, daily practice. She plates the food, a neat mound of the smooth starch beside a bowl of the vibrant, red-tinged soup. It is a solo dinner after a long day, eaten perhaps while watching a show on a screen. There is no griot, no shade bowl, no ritual for the river spirit. And yet, every element on that plate is a conversation with the past. The palm oil is a choice, a flavor of home. The ayaru is a conscious purchase from a specialist vendor, a commitment to a specific taste memory. The act of using the starch to scoop the soup is a physical memory, encoded in muscle. Historians, chefs, and anthropologists still argue about the definition of authenticity in such a context, whether this modern, convenient version is a dilution or a vibrant evolution. But as she takes the first bite, the look of simple contentment on her face suggests the answer. It is continuity. The river's ancient gift has been streamlined, packaged, and globalized, but its essential character, its ability to nourish and connect, remains utterly intact. The surprising, gentle detail is in her spice rack. Next to the pepper and thyme, there is a small, decorative gourd. It is not used for cooking, it is a souvenir, perhaps from a relative's village. It sits there, a beautiful, organic shape amidst the plastic and steel, a silent nod to the origin of it all. She might not consciously think of the Niger's paradoxal flow or the Songhai salt trade as she eats, but in the flavors on her tongue, she is experiencing their direct, delicious consequence. The millennia of innovation, the first clay pot, the domestication of millet, the fermentation of beans, the extraction of palm oil, all culminate in this quiet, private, utterly normal moment of nourishment. You watch as she finishes her meal, washes her single pot and bowl, and turns off the kitchen light. The journey from the riverside at dusk to this softly lit apartment is vast in time and technology, but astonishingly short in taste and intent. The simple dinner has completed its historical arc. It began as an act of survival by a river, became a tool of community, a symbol of power, a test of resilience, and now, it is a comfort, a personal heritage, a choice. The river still flows, outside the city lights. People still fish from pirogues, farmers still watch the sky, and somewhere, a griot's voice still rises over a fire. But here, in this modern night, the ancient Niger has found a new, quiet channel to the sea, flowing directly onto a dinner plate, connecting a single person, through the simple, profound act of eating, to the deep, nourishing current of history. The story of the river and its dinners now ebbs, its current slowing as it reaches the wide, calm estuary of sleep. All those flavors, the smoky char of hunter's meat, the clean tang of scholars' beans, the rich silk of royal soup, the resilient bitterness of foraged greens, they all mingle now into a single, comforting aftertaste of human continuity. The fires, from the lone farmer's embers to the roaring trenches of the royal kitchen, have burned down to gentle, glowing coals in the memory, their light softening, their heat becoming a diffuse and pleasant warmth that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the simple, astounding fact of endurance. The voices, from the trader's baritone to the griot's melody to the modern cook's quiet hum, blend into a distant, harmonious murmur, like the river itself heard from very far away, a sound that doesn't tell a story anymore but simply confirms that the story goes on. The hands that pounded grain, shaped pots, dipped into shad bowls, now rest. The urgency of hunger, the thrill of the feast, the tension of the wait, all those sharp edges are smoothed by time and retelling, becoming a landscape of gentle hills and valleys in the mind, easy to wander through without fear of stumbling. You have traveled far, but you are anchored here, in the deep, sure knowledge that the most complex histories, the rise and fall of empires, the silent heroism of daily life, can all be found simmering in a single pot, over a single flame, tended by a single pair of hands, on the bank of a river that, against all logic, forever turns toward home. Let that be the final thought, the last scent on the air, not of smoke, but of oath after rain, promising that tomorrow, there will be another dinner, and it will be enough. Now, let the current of this long, nourishing story carry you gently away, into the quiet, where no more journeys are required, only rest.